For 60,000 years, before a single supermarket, before refrigeration, before farming, Aboriginal Australians fed themselves from one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. And not just survived, thrived. They built complex societies, maintained the oldest living cultures in human history, and developed a food knowledge so sophisticated that modern nutritional scientists are still catching up. Number 18 on this list contains more vitamin C than an orange. Number 7 was used as a natural antibiotic long before penicillin existed. And number 2, scientists recently confirmed, has a nutritional profile that rivals any superfood you will find at Harris Farm for $22 a punnet. This is the story of what they ate, how they ate it, and why it worked. Hit subscribe before we start. Let's count down. Number 25, Warrigal greens. Before European settlers arrived and called them weeds, Warrigal greens blanketed coastal dunes and riverbanks from Queensland to Victoria. Aboriginal communities across the southeast harvested these thick, slightly succulent leaves and blanched them briefly over hot coals or in water, drawing out oxalic acid before eating. That blanching step was not accidental. It was science passed through generations. A handful provided calcium, vitamin C, and iron in a single meal. European settlers who ignored Aboriginal food knowledge and failed to eat them often developed scurvy within months. The people who had been eating Warrigal greens for thousands of years did not. Today, fine dining restaurants in Sydney charge $16 a side for wilted Warrigal greens with butter and lemon. They call it native spinach. The original custodians called it dinner. Every few years, bunya pines in southeast Queensland drop their enormous cones, each one weighing up to 10 kilograms and packed with fat, protein-rich nuts the size of chestnuts. When the bunya season arrived, groups from hundreds of kilometres away would travel to the Bunya Mountains for gatherings that functioned as both festivals and food harvests. Thousands of people came together to feast, trade, and celebrate. The nuts were eaten raw, roasted in coals, ground into paste, or fermented in running water for long-term preservation. A single large cone could sustain one person for several days. Calorie-dense and filling, bunya nuts were the original slow carbohydrate. They released energy gradually, keeping people steady across a full day of activity. Nothing like the sugar spike and crash cycle modern Australians know so well. Number 23rd, magpie goose eggs. In the wetlands of Arnhem Land and Kakadu, magpie geese nested in vast colonies across the floodplains each wet season. Aboriginal people of the top end harvested their eggs with careful precision, taking some and leaving others to ensure populations remained healthy. A single magpie goose egg is roughly 3 times the size of a chicken egg, rich in yolk and deeply savoury. They were cooked directly in the coals or cracked into paperbark parcels and steamed. The protein content made them crucial when other animals were harder to hunt. The management of nesting sites was not casual. It was active, deliberate conservation that maintained food security across generations. Modern ecologists studying Kakadu now reference this management as a model for sustainable resource use. Number 22, lily pilly. Clusters of bright pink and purple fruit burst from rainforest trees along the eastern coast. Lily pilly comes in dozens of varieties, from small tart berries to large apple-scented fruit with a spongy crunch that tastes faintly of cloves and rosewater. Aboriginal communities ate them fresh, dried them for later, or crushed them into a thick paste mixed with water as a refreshing drink. Modern food scientists analysing lily pilly extracts have found levels of antioxidants that rival blueberries, the darling of the superfood industry. But unlike blueberries, lily pilly trees grow wild and abundant across Australia's eastern seaboard. You can find one in half the suburban gardens in New South Wales right now. The knowledge of which varieties tasted sweetest, which needed processing, and when each one ripened was held by women who managed these trees the way a modern orchardist manages a farm. Without fences, without fertilizer, without chemicals. Along the Murray-Darling River system, freshwater mussels accumulated in middens that archaeologists have found stretching hundreds of meters in length. These shell deposits are not rubbish dumps. They are the record of sustained, intelligent food harvesting across thousands of years. The mussels were collected in cooler months. cooked directly in coals until they opened, and eaten with hands still warm from the fire. The flesh is mild, slightly sweet, and rich in zinc, iron, and omega-3 fatty acids. Middens near Mildura have been dated to over 40,000 years old, making them among the oldest continuous food sites on Earth. The communities that built them understood seasonal availability and the difference between harvesting sustainably and stripping a resource bare. They chose sustainability every time for 40,000 years. Number 20, Kwandong, the desert peach. A vivid red fruit about the size of a golf ball, with a flesh that balances sweet and tart in a way that makes your mouth think it cannot quite place the flavor. Found across the arid center, Kwandong was a critical food source during dry seasons when almost everything else had failed. The fruit was eaten fresh, dried into leather-like strips for carrying on long walks, or boiled and reduced into a thick preserve. The stones were cracked open for the oil-rich kernel inside, providing essential fats in a landscape where animal fat was not always available. Kwandong is roughly twice as rich in vitamin C as an orange. In a desert environment where citrus does not grow, this was survival nutrition. Today, Kwandong jam appears in specialty food shops for $15 a jar. For most of human history in Australia, it was simply what was ripe and waiting to be picked. Number 19, emu. Every part of the emu was used. The meat, lean and dark red, was roasted over an open fire or cooked underground in earth ovens. The fat, rendered from the thick deposits under the skin, served as both food and medicine. It was rubbed into skin and joints for relief from pain and to protect against the cold desert nights. Emu fat contains high levels of oleic acid, the same beneficial fat found in olive oil, and it also contains anti-inflammatory compounds that researchers are now investigating for pharmaceutical applications. The eggs, each equal in volume to a dozen chicken eggs, were baked whole in the coals. The bones were cracked for marrow. Nothing was wasted, ever. That principle was not a philosophical choice. It was embedded so deeply in the food culture that it shaped everything about how resources were managed across the continent. Here is where things get remarkable. The Kakadu plum contains the highest recorded concentration of natural vitamin C of any food on Earth. Not one of the highest, up to 5,000 milligrams of vitamin C per 100 grams of fruit. An orange contains about 50 milligrams per 100 grams. That is 100 times more vitamin C in a wild fruit that Aboriginal communities across the top end have been eating and preserving for thousands of years. They did not need a laboratory to tell them it was good for them. They knew from the generations before them who had stayed healthy, who had healed faster, and who had survived. The Kakadu plum is now sold as a powdered extract in health food shops across Australia for $40 per 100 grams. The knowledge that it was worth something existed here for 50,000 years, before anyone in a white coat confirmed it. Deep in the red earth of Central Australia, certain ant species store nectar in the distended abdomens of specialist workers that hang from the ceilings of underground chambers like living honeypots. Finding them required digging down as much as 2 meters, following the workers' trails from the surface. The reward was a small, golden, intensely sweet drop of pure floral nectar, more complex in flavor than commercial honey because it was made from dozens of different desert blossoms. Honey ants were a luxury food, eaten with obvious pleasure, and their harvest sites were known, remembered, and visited seasonally for generations. Bush food chefs who have tasted them describe the experience as unlike anything else in the Australian pantry. A burst of concentrated wildflower sweetness with an earthy undertone. No cooking required. Nature did all the work. First pattern break. Here is what conventional history usually leaves out. The foods on this list were not foraged haphazardly by people wandering and hoping. They were the product of one of the most sophisticated land management systems ever developed. The burning of country done seasonally and with precision encouraged the growth of specific food plants and grasses that attracted game. Certain trees were never touched in certain seasons. Waterways were managed to maintain fish populations. This was agriculture. It was just agriculture that did not look like European agriculture, so Europeans did not recognize it. That misunderstanding cost Australia enormously. Back to the list. Number 16. Wattle seed. Ground wattle seed tastes like nothing else. Roasted and milled, it produces a flour with a deep, nutty, slightly chocolatey aroma with hints of hazelnut and coffee. It was ground between stones into a flour used for damper-style cakes baked in hot ash. The seed is high in protein, roughly 23%, and has a low glycemic index, meaning it releases energy slowly without spiking blood sugar. For people walking long distances across open country, steady energy release was not a preference, it was essential. There are over 1,000 species of wattle across Australia, and Aboriginal communities had detailed knowledge of which seeds were edible, which needed roasting to remove bitterness, and which were best for grinding. Modern food companies are now producing wattle seed coffee, wattle seed ice cream, and wattle seed butter at considerable profit. The people who developed the original knowledge of the ingredient receive comparatively little of it. The most iconic bush food on this list, and also the most misunderstood. Eaten raw, they taste like eggs with a slightly nutty finish. Cooked briefly over coals, the skin crisps and the interior turns rich and creamy. 100 grams contain more protein than the equivalent weight of beef, significant good fat, and a range of minerals. In desert Australia, where large game was sometimes scarce for weeks at a time, these larvae were reliable, abundant, and genuinely nutritious. Women and children were the primary harvesters, using digging sticks to expose root tunnels at the base of certain wattle trees. The skill was in finding the right trees and knowing the right season. The knowledge was passed down with care, because knowing where to find witchetty grubs in the Simpson Desert was the difference between feeding your family and going hungry. Long before the idea of flavouring food with citrus arrived from Europe, Aboriginal cooks across the eastern rainforest used the leaves of lemon myrtle to bring brightness and fragrance to meat, fish, and ground seed cakes. The leaves contain a higher concentration of citral, the compound responsible for lemon flavour, than lemon itself. The scent when you crush a fresh leaf is extraordinary, clean, sharp, almost medicinal. It also had practical uses far beyond flavour. Lemon myrtle has demonstrated powerful antimicrobial properties, inhibiting bacterial and fungal growth. This was not folk medicine in a dismissive sense. It was applied knowledge of how plant compounds interacted with infection, built through careful observation across generations. Today, lemon myrtle essential oil is sold internationally as a natural antimicrobial cleaner. The communities who understood its properties first are rarely mentioned in the marketing copy. Number 13. Barramundi. Australia's most celebrated fish was a foundation protein for coastal and estuarine communities across the north for tens of thousands of years. They were caught with hand-built fish traps made from stone and wood that channeled tidal movements to corral fish into holding pools. Some of these traps are still partially intact today. The stone fish traps at Budge Bim in Victoria are now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognised as evidence of systematic aquaculture dating back at least 6,000 years. Barramundi was smoked over paper bark for preservation, cooked whole on coals, or eaten raw in some coastal communities. But beyond the food value, the fish trap systems represent a level of environmental engineering that changes what we think we know about pre-contact Australia. These were not people simply reacting to what nature provided. They were shaping what nature provided. Number 12. Bush tomato. They are tiny and wrinkled, and at first taste they suggest caramel, with a sharp, almost feral finish that hits at the back of the throat. Bush tomatoes grow across central Australia's rocky ranges, but must be used dry or thoroughly cooked because the fresh fruit contains psilocybin, a mildly toxic compound that cooking neutralizes. This is sophisticated food knowledge. Knowing which plants require preparation, what that preparation must involve, and what happens if you skip the step, is exactly the kind of knowledge that takes generations to develop and cannot be assumed or improvised. Dried bush tomatoes were ground into spice, mixed into meat dishes, and carried as a concentrated flavour hit on long walks. Modern Australian chefs prize AKU de Jura as a signature native spice. It tastes like nothing else you have ever eaten, which is precisely the point. Second pattern break. There is a pharmaceutical industry taking significant interest in a number of these plants right now. Kakadu plum extract appears in skincare products across Europe and Japan. Finger lime caviar is sold in Michelin-starred restaurants in Paris. Lemon myrtle is used in Japanese cosmetics. The global native foods industry is worth billions of dollars and growing. A significant portion of that value was first identified and preserved by Aboriginal communities, who have received almost none of the commercial benefit. Keep that context in mind as we move through the top 11. Number 11, pandanus. Along the tropical coasts and floodplains of northern Australia, pandanus palms produced large segmented fruits packed with edible kernels. The seed kernels were eaten raw or ground into a paste mixed with water. The bases of the young leaves were chewed for their starchy sweetness. Pandanus root fibre was used medicinally for coughs and respiratory conditions. And the large leaves were woven into baskets that held food, water, and everything else that mattered. What looked to outsiders like wild vegetation was often a carefully cultivated food landscape, tended without fences or signage, recognizable only to people who understood the language of the land. Everyone knows macadamia nuts now. The global macadamia industry is worth over $1 billion annually. What most people do not know is that Aboriginal communities in subtropical Queensland and northern New South Wales had been harvesting, cracking, and eating macadamia nuts for at least 40,000 years, long before the tree was taken offshore and turned into an international commodity. The nuts were cracked using specially selected stones at certain angles that split the shell without destroying the kernel inside. That cracking technique requires practice. The shells are among the hardest of any nut in the world. Macadamia trees produce nuts for up to 100 years. Communities knew which individual trees produced the best yields and returned to them season after season. Those trees were not randomly discovered. They were known, named, and managed. Murray cod, the largest freshwater fish in Australia, and in the Murray-Darling Basin, was a cornerstone of Aboriginal diet and cultural life for thousands of years. Murray cod can live for over 50 years and grow to lengths of over 1 metre. They were caught using woven nets, traps, wooden hooks, and spears. The flesh is white, firm, and rich, with omega-3 concentrations that are unusual for a freshwater species. For communities hundreds of kilometres from the coast, this made the cod irreplaceable. Dried and smoked cod travelled considerable distances from river communities to inland groups, who had no direct access to water, moving through exchange systems that connected nations across the continent, in networks that operated like trade routes. Number 8, finger lime. Small, finger-shaped citrus fruit native to the rainforest margins of Queensland and New South Wales. Slice one open and the interior is filled with tiny spherical vesicles that look and behave exactly like caviar, bursting with sharp, clean citrus flavour. Aboriginal communities ate them fresh as a tart, refreshing food source, and they used the juice in cooking. The finger lime contains folate, vitamin E, potassium, and vitamin C. It is the folate content that interests modern nutritionists most, given its importance during pregnancy. Knowledge of which plants provided this nutrient before the word folate existed represents observational understanding built across very long periods of careful watching. The finger lime is now a globally traded ingredient. A single punnet costs up to $30 in Sydney's better delis. Third pattern break. At this point in the list, you might be noticing a pattern that goes beyond nutrition. Every single one of these foods required specific knowledge to harvest safely, prepare properly, or find it all. That knowledge was not written down. It was held in memory and passed through family and ceremony across generations. When that chain of transmission was broken, the knowledge went with it. Entire food systems disappeared, not because the plants and animals disappeared, but because the people who understood them were removed from country. That is the real story of what was lost. Not just foods, the knowledge of how to use them, Number 7. Lemon aspen. A rainforest citrus relative from far north Queensland, with a flavour so bracingly tart and fragrant it almost stops you breathing. Aboriginal communities used lemon aspen fresh as a flavouring for fish and meat, and applied the juice medicinally to skin infections and minor wounds. Modern testing has confirmed significant antibacterial activity in lemon aspen extract against several bacterial strains, including some antibiotic-resistant ones. The timing of the harvest was precise. The specific trees best known to those who work the rainforest canopy every season. Lemon aspen now appears on Australian fine dining menus as a sauce element and garnish. Its original custodians held the knowledge of what it could do, long before any laboratory confirmed it. Number 6. Kangaroo. The most important large game animal on the continent. Kangaroo meat is extraordinarily lean, high in protein, and rich in conjugated linoleic acid, a fatty acid associated with reduced inflammation and improved immune function. Aboriginal hunters used fire to drive animals toward waiting hunters, studied individual animal behaviour, and targeted specific animals based on age and condition. Every part was consumed. The tail, particularly rich in fat and gelatin, was cooked separately and prized. Internal organs were eaten first, providing iron and vitamins that would diminish with storage. Nothing was left behind. Modern nutritional analysis has led to growing interest from sports dietitians and cardiologists. The leanest, most nutrient-dense red meat available in Australia. Aboriginal Australians knew this. They built their physical culture around it. Number 5. Native bee honey. Australia has 11 species of native stingless bees producing honey across the diverse floral landscape of the east coast and the tropical north. The honey is thinner than European honeybee honey, and it carries a complex acidic sweetness that ranges from caramel to passion fruit depending on the season. It was harvested from hollow logs, with care taken not to destroy the colony. Its antimicrobial activity in laboratory tests has exceeded that of some commercial honeys, and communities applied it to wounds, burns, and skin conditions for generations. Hive management, knowing which trees house colonies and ensuring continued access, represented yet another layer of active land stewardship that mainstream history spent too long describing as passive foraging. Davidson plum. A fruit so intensely tart and deeply pigmented that eating one raw is almost confronting. Found in subtropical and tropical rainforests of eastern Australia, Davidson plum is almost black when fully ripe, with a deep red interior that stains everything it touches. It contains among the highest levels of anthocyanins of any Australian native fruit, even more than blueberries and acai. It is also rich in potassium, zinc, vitamin E, and calcium. It was eaten fresh, cooked in earth ovens, and dried for preservation and trade. Davidson plum jam is now sold at gourmet food markets across Australia. The trees take years to cultivate. Communities in northern New South Wales and Queensland have been tending them for thousands of years. Muntries, small pale green berries about the size of blueberries, growing low to the ground across the coastal scrublands of South Australia. Their taste is a startling combination of sweet, spicy, and apple-like, with a satisfying crunch. They were dried and pressed into cakes for transport and trade over long distances, representing one of the earliest forms of portable preserved food in Australian history. When scientists finally analysed muntries, the result was not surprising to anyone who already understood that foods surviving in harsh environments packed extraordinary nutritional resources. Muntries contain 4 times the antioxidant levels of blueberries. They grow wild on the South Australian coast and have done so for 50,000 years of human history. Number 2, Wongai plum, a small, sweet, dark purple fruit from the Cape York Peninsula and the islands of the Torres Strait. The Wongai plum was a staple food for coastal communities during the fruiting season, eaten fresh, straight from the tree, or dried for storage and travel. The fruit is high in carbohydrates, providing fast, reliable energy during the physically demanding season of ocean fishing and long-distance travel between islands. Torres Strait Islander communities harvested wongai with the same seasonal precision they applied to every food source, watching the trees for the first signs of ripeness, and timing the harvest to coincide with other seasonal activities. The plum is rarely discussed in mainstream native food writing, which tends to focus on mainland species. Its importance to the island communities who depended on it was no less significant. No single food earns the top position, because the most remarkable thing about Aboriginal Australian food culture is not one ingredient, it is the system. The coastal communities of Arnhem Land developed seafood harvesting across mangroves, reefs, seagrass, and the open ocean, sustaining communities year-round without ever depleting the resource. Dugong, turtle, reef fish, shellfish, and sea plants were all harvested within complex seasonal frameworks that governed what could be taken, who could take it, and when. Dugong hunts were governed by ceremony. The meat was shared according to strict protocols that distributed nutrition across the community. Protect the seagrass, protect the dugong. This is what integrated food system management looks like. This is what sustained human communities across one of the most resource-variable environments on Earth for longer than modern civilization has existed. From Warrigal Greens at number 25 to the coastal systems of Arnhem Land at number 1, the story is the same. These were not lucky discoveries. They were the product of the deepest food knowledge ever developed, built across 60,000 years of observation, practice, and deliberate management of country. The knowledge that food and country are the same thing, that what you do to the land determines what the land can give you. Modern Australians are beginning to understand what was known here all along. Which of these 25 surprised you most? Let us know in the comments below.